Welcome to Don't Chuck It Up. I'm Chuck, a college counselor helping families and educators navigate the college search and application process with clarity and confidence. Today, we are talking about ROTC. And I am not an expert in this, so I brought in a guest today. So my guest today is Lisa Hillhouse. She is an independent educational consultant and a military service academy specialist, and she has also served in the Air Force Reserves for over 26 years. Welcome to the Don't Chuck It Up show, Lisa.
Thank you, Chuck. It's so great to be here.
I am so excited for this episode because I get a lot of questions about ROTC. I used to work at a college that had a great ROTC program, but I don't really understand all of the nuts and bolts. So I'm excited. You have so much knowledge on this. So for those of you who really want to know all the answers to the questions about ROTC, Lisa and I are going to cover all of the topics today. So save this episode and like it and share it with friends. But before we dive in, Lisa, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you?
Sure. So I went through Air Force ROTC and commissioned at the College of the Holy Cross. I went active duty for 9 years and then went in the reserves for 17. And how I got into admissions and leadership development was taking a special assignment teaching Air Force ROTC at Berkeley. That's where I started doing a lot of volunteering with admissions, not just doing ROTC scholarships and teaching leadership and mentoring students. From there, I left the military, went in the reserves, and worked at the Air Force Academy for 15 years. So helping run all the recruiting operations for all of Northern California. And then I also worked at a few different civilian colleges as well. So I've seen a lot of different things in admissions, but the last 11 years I've been in IEC. And so about 40 to 50% of my students from around the country are military focused, so academy and ROTC scholarships, but the rest are looking at regular schools too. So I kind of handle a little bit of both. But I'm especially passionate about these young people because this program was a real game changer for me and just changed the trajectory of my life. So like a lot of people in education, we value learning and helping others. So really excited to help kids who, this is the right path for them.
Absolutely. And we may have to have you back in the future to talk specifically about the military service academies, because that's a whole nother
It is a whole
process.
nother day.
That's a whole
Yes, for
nother, like,
sure. I love that.
I've looked at it at a high level and I'm like, okay, nope. I need someone like you to help me
Right.
out with that. So ROTC, what I love about ROTC is it's kind of halfway between. So students can graduate from high school and go directly into the military. So they could just,
Mhm.
enlist, or
Right.
they could go through college and then enlist and do it kind of post-college. But ROTC kind
Mhm.
of blends those two together to allow students to have both a regular college experience as well
Mhm.
as having the military experience. So that's how I explain ROTC. How do you explain
Right.
ROTC?
For sure. So ROTC is a part-time leadership development program with the goal that you're going to serve in the active duty military. So Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Space Force, but you are a full-time student at what we call a civilian college. So that would just be a normal college for most people. So the idea is that some kids will go right from high school into ROTC, and when they graduate, they're commissioned as either a second lieutenant or as an ensign, same rank, but different branches. And they're typically going active duty for 4 or 5 years, some people longer, but they know they have this job at the end of college. So they're getting a degree. It could be in any area, but they're also developing as a leader throughout college. And then, of course, there's some summer aspects too. But it's a really like nice way to not have that intensity and shock and awe of an academy, to, like you said, have this like quote unquote real college experience,
Yeah.
but also be preparing for your life after. So when we think about co-ops, this is like the ultimate co-op. It's
Oh, yeah.
experiential learning all through school. So that's another great part about it too.
That's a great way to explain it. It's kind of like the ultimate co-op. I like that. So just to make sure people understand, which branches offer an ROTC program?
Sure. So the one branch that doesn't is the Coast Guard. So if you wanted to be an officer, so a leader in the military, and officers are only about 20% of the military. So you're coming in at that higher level. But Army ROTC commissions into the Army, Navy commissions into both the Navy or the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps is more competitive to get into. And then Air Force commissions into the Air Force and the Space Force. And the Space Force, like the Marine Corps, is also competitive. So you can go into any branch other than the Coast Guard through ROTC.
I think that was a great way to explain it, because I think some people are looking for Marine ROTC and they don't realize that that is
Mhm.
actually part of Navy.
Right. An
Uh,
option.
right. And now Space Force is obviously the newest option, and that would be connected
Yes.
to Air Force. So if they're thinking
Right.
Space Force, they really need to go through the Air Force process to be considered
Right.
for Space Force. So when students and families are thinking about, all right, who is the best student for ROTC,
Mhm.
what are things that you say a student should be interested in?
Sure. So they need to be a strong student. That's important. We need you to graduate, do well. They need to have leadership potential if they don't already have leadership experience. They need to be a self starter, somebody who's motivated to stretch and grow and learn. They need to be physically fit. So some branches put a higher emphasis than others on that, but in particular, the Marine Corps and the Army. And then also to really want to have that sense of service, that sense of giving back. And I feel like one of the reasons I went in is because I wanted to live and work overseas and I wanted to help people. And I feel like that's exactly what my career was. So it's not for kids who are like, I grew up in Atlanta and I only want to live in Atlanta. Like that's going to be hard. You have to have that sense of adventure and want that challenge. So, you can have a lot of different personalities who do that and a lot of different backgrounds, but those are kind of the basic framework.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I also love that students can really major in just about anything.
Hmm.
I can't even think of a major that may not qualify for an ROTC program off the top of my head. I think there's a belief that you have to be an engineer or a biologist or something like that. But
Right.
I've had students that were music majors that did ROTC because they were considering being a leadership position within the music world of the military, and that's a whole nother factor.
Absolutely. When I was in ROTC, we had 125 cadets at my detachment, and I was the only non-tech major. I was political science. Everybody else was double E, ME, computer science, math, physics. So I would say there are more non-technical people back when I commissioned, but Air Force and Navy in particular are still more focused on STEM majors, especially in their scholarship program. But the Marine program and Army are much more flexible. And part of it is like their mission. We're going to
Yeah.
teach you the specifics that we need you to do. But Air Force and Navy do have like a lot of high tech systems in particular. And so that's why they're looking a little bit more for STEM. But again, any major is a possibility.
Yeah, because the military has a whole lot of different jobs and career paths, and they need all types
Mhm.
of leaders to be able to be in the military. I think one of the worries that a lot of students and especially parents are worried about for ROTC is that, do you have to be fully committed to military life
Mhm.
if you start in an ROTC program? Because as you said, a lot of these kids that are going into ROTC are really strong academics. They're strong leaders. They are,
Right.
change makers and future, future leaders. And so
Right.
ROTC looks like, wow, this is really cool. But do I have to commit and, plan out my service, from day one?
Right. Yeah, no, it is totally different. So, high school students can apply for the scholarship programs. And if they get a scholarship, they start, in that program that freshman year of college. So you have that whole freshman year, if you're on a scholarship, to decide, Air Force ROTC is for me or not for me. Sometimes students leave because there's academic issues or medical issues, or they just decide it's not for them. So they have to decide, I want to no longer continue before the first day of sophomore year. If they don't have a scholarship, so if they walk on the program, so I didn't even know about Air Force ROTC. So I walked on my second semester of college and then competed for a scholarship. So if they walk on, they have the first 2 years to kind of try before you buy. If you get a scholarship right away and you're, say, a sophomore, that's when you're committed, or if you're a junior, after your summer training. So the military is lining up, like, we need 2,000 lieutenants commissioning this, calendar year, et cetera. So yes, you can definitely start it and decide it's not for you. One thing I've noticed recently, the Army and Air Force are redirecting a little more scholarship money toward the in-college cadets because they're proving themselves, they're committing, versus people starting and turning in their scholarship. And I would say most people don't start and quit without a scholarship. But I've had that too over time as well.
I was gonna say, even back when I was working at Iowa State University, there were a lot of students that were just kind of walk-ons for ROTC, but then they got a scholarship somewhere during the first year, and that kind of kept them into the program. But yeah, I had very few students that I can remember of that were actually scholarship from day one. They were more like,
Right.
okay, this came later because they got to try it out, and they go, yep, it's great. And not everyone stuck with it. There were students that were like, okay, I've had my, first semester of this, and I'm like, no, I
Right.
want my Saturdays back. So they
Right.
decided they didn't want to do that. And that's totally fine.
And there are definitely things that can make students, cause that decision. So, for example, maybe like they're not as physically fit, and maybe they're in a
Right.
program that has a bigger requirement, or maybe academically they're struggling, and so they might want to change majors. And if you have a scholarship, the military has to approve changing that scholarship money to a different major. So sometimes I've seen, students leave the program or turn in their scholarship, for that. But like you were talking about Iowa State, I've had great outcomes from cadets and midshipmen there. And I think it's one of those programs too where colleges really like the ROTC cadets
Mhm.
because they're on a track to graduate generally in 4 years. They have academic standards. They shouldn't be getting in trouble, off campus or outside the classroom.
For sure.
There are leaders on campus, and then generally, they have this scholarship money. So it's a win-win for schools. And there's definitely schools like Iowa State that are very pro-military. There's definitely schools that will work with students, and if they have a scholarship, can kind of help with that admissions process, or maybe help with appeals and things like that too. So it is a win for campuses too.
Yeah. For those of you who are listening on the podcast, I would encourage you to jump over to the YouTube channel, because I'm going to be showing some of the websites that Lisa has given me as resources for all of you. These will be also in the show notes. So for those of you on the podcast going, oh no, I'm not on the YouTube page, that's okay. I will have them as available as resource links for you in the show notes. So there's a great resource for kind of the three major areas. So U.S. Air Force ROTC, it's a great college locator website that you provided with us. And as you said before we started chatting, this is a great way for families to start kind of their research process and finding out which schools have these programs so they can start thinking about those scholarship opportunities. So Air Force has a website. The Army has their website, which, as you mentioned before, is connected to Marine as well. So if people are thinking of that area, they would go and start with the Army website to find the Marine options. And no, that's not right. Am I
Navy
right?
with Marines.
Navy was
Navy with
Marine.
Marines.
Oh boy.
Yes, but
Army's
Army
just
with
Army.
Army.
Army's just Army. Go Army.
All good. Yes.
I don't need any of my Army listeners to yell at me and find out me later. So I'll step back. Air Force has Space Force. So if you do Air Force,
Right.
that's Space Force. Army is just Army, which is the largest, if I'm not mistaken. And then
It is.
Navy has your Marine. So the websites are all very, very different. It's surprising for having three different government military entities. Their websites are completely different layout and completely different styles.
Definitely. The school locator is a really important first step. So what colleges am I looking at, and do they have that program? One thing that makes ROTC harder for some kids is if they're not at the host school. So when I was at Berkeley, Berkeley was the host for Army, Navy, Air Force. And then for Air Force, we had 25 crosstown schools. So it was St. Mary's College of California, University of San Francisco, Sonoma State. So if a student's at a crosstown school, sometimes they could be an hour, hour and a half away.
Yeah.
And that is definitely a reason students may not stay in the program just because of that time and travel commitment. So it's definitely easier if you're at like Tulane or if you're at Loyola New Orleans, which is right next door, or University of New Orleans, which is just a few minutes away. But the locator is a great thing. And then those pages also have the scholarship requirements, the application, things like that too.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point because we've also seen this year's a few colleges have stepped back with their ROTC programs, and so families may be looking to those cross-town experiences where you're now finding
Right.
a college that is as you said, it's close. It's not like you're going to be driving hours
Mhm.
on end, but
Right.
when you have Saturday morning training, you're going to be waking up a little bit earlier
Right.
to get there to that training because you don't want to be late. That's for darn sure.
That's for sure.
So I think that's a great consideration, but it also allows students to pick colleges that may not have an ROTC program, but maybe they have a different thing that they're connected to, and therefore they can still, have their cake and eat it too, for lack of a better phrase, but, have
Exactly.
this particular college experience and then travel
Mhm.
to a collaborating college so that they can, have the ROTC experience.
For sure. And sometimes you'll have a cluster of students at a school that's across town, and they'll do some of their like physical fitness training in the mornings together versus commuting to
Yep,
that school. So it's just good to have community wherever you are, even if it's just a few other cadets or midshipmen.
for sure. Yeah, because some of these smaller colleges have very, very small ROTC programs, and it's nice when you are in a cluster or a group of schools, and you can, share with your training and share with your commiseration as well. So there's, but yeah, there's each one of these websites has a great list of colleges, and I appreciate you finding these websites for us so that my viewers can check these out and my listeners can check them out from the show notes and really continue to explore these.
Perfect.
So how do the ROTC scholarships actually work?
Mhm. Super. So we talked about how there's money that students at the end of junior year, beginning of senior year can apply for the college scholarships. So for Army, each branch is a little bit different and
Yep.
things can change year to year depending on when you'll hear this. But for Army, there are 4 year and 3 year full
Oh,
tuition scholarships. So you tell the Army, here's my top 5 schools I'm applying to. You apply in the major or majors that you list with the Army ROTC application. And if you get a scholarship, that's going to cover your full tuition. And so they're going to tell you, okay, it's for these 3 schools you listed, IU, Boston
right.
College, et cetera. Um, every ROTC scholarship is going to include a book allowance. So it varies by branches. It could be 750, 900, 1200. And then they're going to have a monthly stipend. And that's also going to vary from like 250 to $500 a month. But so again, branch dependent. For Navy, they are 4 year full tuition scholarships. So because there's not 3 and 4 year like Army, maybe Navy is going to give out less because you could be
Mhm.
taking that to Notre Dame, which costs the Navy a lot. You could be in state and taking it to Rutgers, which is a good deal for them. For Air Force, also do a little different. They have 4 year full tuition scholarships. They have 4 year $36,000 a year scholarships, and then 4 year $18,000 a year scholarships. So for Air Force, they're not telling you where to take it. Like Navy does direct you, Army gives you a choice. But for Air Force, you could take it to any Air Force ROTC program that you've gotten into. So they're all a little bit different, but the students to do that application, it's an online application. Air Force is the fastest and easiest. Army's in between. Navy's the most work, just to prepare you time wise. What you're doing is submitting transcripts, official test scores. So test scores are required. Some branches will super score, some will not. And then some other programs require recommendation letters, some do not. Some require multiple essays, others don't. And then you're going to take a physical fitness test, which is going to be different for each program. And then you are going to give them like put your resume information into the application. So all that information gets sent to a board. One of the most important things is the interview. So you really have to prepare for it because that officer is evaluating you from an ROTC unit or sometimes from the Navy recruiting service. And they're saying, what's your potential to serve? You know, what are your human relation skills, your communication skills, your leadership? How do you handle stress? How do you manage time? Are you proactive? Are you engaging? You know, are you what we're looking for? And then a board using unit commanders is going to review the applications and then, you know, give out the scholarships. So every program has different timelines, but generally the first scholarship board for all the programs would be in October. Some programs have ones throughout the winter. And then the last boards are kind of that March, April timeframe. So the boards would meet your senior year. So you can get a scholarship offer, or you could be denied, or you could be carried over to another board to be reviewed. And so, you know, the kids who are really on the ball, we're applying super early and we're trying to meet the October boards. And in some cases, those results are coming out right when like EA and ED deadlines are. So beginning of November. So I have my students put on their apps, like I've applied for the Air Force ROTC scholarship. And, you know, if I get it, I want to bring it to this school if it's a case where it's going to help them with admission.
Right.
Or maybe they're applying later, they have a scholarship. I put it on, like they put it on their Common App talking about receiving it. I also have my students work with the admissions officers at the schools if it's going to be helpful. So schools like Holy Cross have an admissions officer and they read every ROTC applicant. And so they're working with the units and with the crosstowns at WPI and making sure, like, you know, can we take them or can they use that scholarship? Can we give supplementals? So applying early is really helpful, but some kids aren't hearing about the scholarship till, you know, February, March, April. So in that case, you know, it doesn't really impact admissions as much, maybe if you're waitlisted. But again, knowing that information earlier can kind of help you shorten or expand your college list too. So timing is everything.
Yeah. And
it's a lot.
As you and I know, like timing is imperative on these types of things. And it doesn't mean that you can't do it later. So I'm glad that you mentioned that there are the springboards that happen as well. So like there are still opportunities later, but the most competitive ones, just like with the most competitive colleges and universities, you really have to get after it early in your senior year. So you really recommend that students start thinking about this during the junior year and put together this application at the end of their junior year into the summer. So then it's ready to launch.
Sure. Right. So they open up at different times, but generally April, June, July. But yes, you know, I'm working on that with students in the summer. If they're applying to academies, we're doing that. And then, of course, the regular college things too. So definitely don't put it off till the end just because there's only so much money. And then each board's giving away money. And then, you know, it's just less chances for you.
Right. To me, this sounds just like when I work with, you know, someone who wants to be a recruited athlete or a recruited fine arts performer. You know, it's the same thing. We've got to start early. We've got to get all your documentation and everything. You know, military doesn't have videos, but a lot for athletes in fine performing arts, it's getting your video and your resume and everything like that together.
Right.
This is similar in style. So you've got more stuff you have to do. But as I just want to make sure that people understand, you can still be a walk-on into ROTC and not have a scholarship. So this, what Lisa was just talking about, is the most competitive scholarship programs for the ROTC options, but you can still walk on and do ROTC. You just may not earn a scholarship until farther along in your process.
Right, sophomore year, junior year. And there are more people in ROTC like that freshman, sophomore year who walked on. And so then again, some people are dropping out, maybe they're not medically qualified, et cetera. But by the upperclassmen years, it's rare to not be on a scholarship of some sort.
Right. Yeah. I just want
Right.
to lay that out a little bit so that families are just like, oh man, if we don't do this and
Right.
we miss the scholarship opportunity. I'm like, no, but the most
Right.
competitive ones, you really need to be ahead of the game, especially for, colleges that also are going to
Hmm.
be challenging to apply to, because you're kind of patting your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. You've got to doing the ROTC stuff, and you still have to fill out the college applications. Like those, you don't just
Right.
get a magic pass on those. You have to still do the actual college applications in addition
Right.
to the ROTC application.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
Now that's a lot. Okay, now I know why your job exists. All right, great. So, and that's what I wanted to say is that ROTC isn't just only for students who win scholarships. I would say that
Hmm.
I don't think I've had one of my students who wanted to go into ROTC start with a scholarship. I think a lot of my students have gone
Hmm.
into ROTC because they wanted to kind of check it out, feel it out, and then they did get a scholarship
Right.
later on. But
Right.
my students tend to be a little bit different than the ones that you're working with. So, yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And two, sometimes kids find out about the scholarship too late in the game to apply, or they don't have the test scores, or
Right.
maybe they didn't do a lot of testing because they're from California and there's test optional schools. So, yeah, there's a lot of reasons kids don't compete in the scholarship program.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. You can still be an ROTC.
For
So,
sure.
jumping forward, can we help students and families understand what does ROTC look like when you're actually a college student? I'd love to hear how you view that, and I can share what I saw when I'm at Iowa State as well.
Sure. So there's three parts to ROTC, and this is universal to, regardless of your branch. So there's always going to be physical fitness training. So that might be 2, 3 mornings a week, maybe 500. You're out there doing
Mhm.
calisthenics, weight room, running, etc. So that's kind of that team building, that fitness, things like that. Then you're going to have the academic classes, and those are for credit. And so those could be a 1 credit, like introduction to the Air Force history. It could be a 3 credit, naval sea power and engineering operations, right? So you're going to have some kind of military science class, and it's going to be focused on the branch you're going into.
Mhm.
So, like for Navy and Marine, there's some common classes and some different classes. And then you're going to have the leadership lab, which was my favorite as a cadet. And that's where you're getting together and the upperclassmen are mentoring and training and evaluating the underclassmen. And that's where you're doing all sorts of different things. Like maybe you're learning to drill and march. Maybe it's the day where you're learning first aid and emergency medicine. Maybe you're out, doing weapons training. It could be a career day where officers come from a local base and talk about their backgrounds. It could be military intelligence briefings about what's going on geopolitically. So just a lot of different hands-on experiences to help you learn, who you are as a leader, to challenge yourself to get better. So there's all sorts of different size units. Some are just a few dozen, some are several hundred. So
Mhm.
again, that's kind of where checking like, is Auburn, a big unit that's really competitive and it's going to be harder to have key roles? Is that a good thing? Or do I want a school like Yale where it's a smaller unit, but
Right.
then, also more people are having to do more things. So you're doing those activities. And then in the summer, there are some mandatory things, and that's again depending on the branch. So it could be advanced camp for the Army, so leadership and tactical experience. It could be field training for the Air Force. So there's also some war game components to that, and again evaluation. And then for Navy, they do it a little different. They have required training every year, and you go on a cruise for a couple weeks, and so you're following junior enlisted, junior officers, and then you're looking at the community you want to go into. So like marine aviation or, surface warfare. But the other summers, there's a lot of things students can do. So you have got things like maybe I want to go to med school. So I'm doing medical research or medical, like clinical rotations as a cadet or midshipman. Maybe I'm, following in a public affairs unit at chaplain. Maybe I'm doing engineering research. I could be earning my jump wings. I could be getting my pilot slot or flying gliders. So there's a lot of things students can do in the summer that are optional, but kind of build those skills. And so that kind of is a little more like that leadership lab experience. But at the same time, you could be interning or co-oping in the summer. You could be working. It doesn't have to be your whole summer. So cadets are busy during the school year, but ROTC is meant to be part-time, and it's meant
Right.
that you're a full-time student and that's your priority academically.
Yeah. My experience when I was working at Iowa State is that the ROTC program almost was like a minor that the students were doing because
Hmm.
they're adding on some components in addition to the physical fitness stuff. But like as far as the
Right.
coursework and the training, it's almost like
Hmm.
it was like a minor attached to what
Right.
they were focusing on that way as far as class time commitments. Um,
Absolutely.
but I'm wondering, and I'm sure there's people listening to this going, so can can a student still be a double major? Can they do study abroad? Can they play
Mhm.
a sport?
Definitely. Yes. All those things. I would say with ROTC, it's really challenging to be an NCAA athlete,
Yep.
of any level, one,
Yep.
two, or three. I have had students do it. So every minute of their day is structured.
Yes.
But is it easier to do club or rec league athletics with it? Yes. Have I had a lot of Greek life students? For sure. I've had students living off campus, students who are working part time, students who are commuting. Definitely a lot of different things. Students who are doing co-ops and research opportunities. So we want you to have like a really well-rounded experience. In terms of study abroad, that's really important. So just like a regular engineer or nurse would need to plan when they're going to go
Yeah.
because they don't want to miss certain things. ROTC totally supports that. They also have language immersion programs and study abroads, for the military too. So absolutely you can do those things. And so what ROTC would do is say, maybe have you come in early before you go, take your fitness test, and maybe doing some independent study, and making that up, as the time goes on. But for sure, you can absolutely do those things.
Yeah. That was my experience when I was working at Iowa State and the students were doing all those things. I even did see some of the students were involved in Greek life, but again, that is like ultra scheduled. Like, I mean,
Right.
your calendar is down to the minute almost as to where you need to be and what you need to do. And they were heavily involved. I worked in Academic Success Center and we had quite a few students that were student workers and they were,
Oh, yeah.
I loved it because they were always on time. They were always apologetic if they did something wrong, and they were well-trained young humans, and it was wonderful.
Right.
But they were fully invested in the college experience. I think what
Right.
might be a little shocking is that you might be in your full military dress for a particular day or for a particular
Hmm.
program. And other than that, you look like a normal college student for the most part. And I think when
Right.
my students would come in full uniform, I'd be like, oh yeah, I forgot. You're doing all of that stuff. And it was like, oh, okay.
Right.
That's kind of a
Right.
shock.
For sure. And there are schools that will give them minors in military science
Yep.
or, naval affairs, military history. Sometimes it's just the ROTC would give you the minors. Sometimes it's a few extra classes. But yes, they're definitely doing those things. And I feel like the being in ROTC is like being in a service or regular fraternity. Like you have
Yeah.
this brotherhood, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of your gender. So I think sometimes kids are like, this is my primary friend group, and these are the people I spend the most time with. So at some schools like Ole Miss, they have a dorm where there's several floors where they'll put the ROTC cadets and midshipmen, things like that too, kind of to like foster more community. I've had students at Purdue where they've rented a couple of houses in a row, and it was all ROTC cadets, and so it's a great way to have like a really different college experience, but also have that traditional one too.
For sure. So you we've helped them with the application process. We've talked a little bit about the college years. What the heck happens upon graduation?
Sure. So it's a little different for Army. So I'll start with them. You have the option to either compete to go active duty, so full-time Army, or you can find a job in the Army National Guard or the Army Reserve. So doing part-time, like I did for most of my career. So it's just really how you rank in your class academically, how you've done in terms of military, and so on. For Navy and for Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, you're going active duty. So, we're commissioning you, and that's going to be your full time job. So, depends on the branch, but you're usually going active duty for 4 or 5 years, which could sound like a long time to kids, but you and I know that's like that, a snap.
It's a flash of time. It's very, very
It
short.
is a flash of time. And to have this guaranteed job, right?
Yep.
So even if students in the Army aren't going active duty, maybe because they already have a civil engineering job from their co-op and they're going to still do the Army part-time, and they could still have chances to deploy and go active duty too. Some fields like aviation related are going to be a bigger time commitment. So they're going to have a year of helicopter training, pilot training, and then they're going to owe more time, like 8, 9, 10 years, just depending on what they do. So that is really at that point like half of a military career, because 20 years is considered a full military career. More people will stay past their initial time than not. And so it's pretty rare for people to get right out. Like for me, I went in not coming from a military family, no intention to stay, all those years, but I loved the people and I loved the mission. And I felt like it was a community I didn't want to get rid of.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why a lot of people will stick with it. And I think like anything, the military, you have to be 110% in. It's not half in, and when you can't be that 110%, that's when it's time to get out or maybe take a smaller role in the reserves or retire. So, this is what ROTC is getting you ready for. But most people are serving active duty for a couple years. And what they do is based on what they studied, how well they did. Are they medically qualified? So like being in aviation or explosive ordnance, that's going to be a different standard than being a logistician or a public affairs officer. And then also too, you can change to a different career field after a couple of years in. And a lot of officers are going on to grad school once they're in the military, whether that's part-time or full-time. So it's a great start, if it's 4 years for you, if it's 24 for you.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of my students has just decided to continue with his military career and now become a military lawyer. So is off to law school after being an officer for a while, and is now okay. Now he can become a lawyer within the military. I was like, okay, and he was a trumpet performance major. Yeah,
I love that.
Yep.
Sometimes they're the ones going to med school. I love that they're going to law school.
Yeah. He first started with the band and then like kind of transitioned out of the band, and and now and I never would have guessed that, but that's was his path, and it's been great, and he's absolutely loved it. So I want people to understand that literally every type of career is connected to the military. You can, be human resources, you can be a chaplain, you can be a counselor, you can work in, the food service, you can, there's all sorts of stuff.
Right. Hotels, hospitality. Right. Yes.
They're all they're little mini cities. So it's literally everything that a city would have, you need to have in the military.
Exactly. Like veterinarians and, auditors, nurses, etc. So yes, some branches will have more opportunities in some areas than others. Yeah. And, we're not really talking about Coast Guard, but they are a smaller branch. So they use other branches for medical support. But generally, yes, anything that's in the civilian world you can do. And then some things that, aren't so much civilian world jobs too.
Some of those jobs I don't want to know exist, but that's the military science that I don't I don't need to know. It's like that's beyond my purview as a civilian, so I'm okay with that. Well, wonderful. Should we dive into some myths and misconceptions?
Absolutely.
So it's going to be rapid fire type stuff. Okay. I'll give you the myth, and you can tell me what the real truth is. So the myth is you have to enlist to do ROTC.
No, when you have a scholarship or a contract, you are signing that I'm going to commit to going into the military, but you are not enlisting and going off to boot camp or leaving college to deploy in a combat mission.
I've also heard that ROTC is only for military families.
Definitely not. I would say more people going in the military do not come from military families. I work with military families too. A lot of people want to kind of blaze their own trail and do something different. So hopefully your family's on board with that.
Another big myth, you lose all of the regular college experience.
Definitely not. Like we said, Greek life, study abroad, working, living on and off campus. ROTC cadets and mids are really busy and really involved. Mhm.
You only can major in STEM.
Definitely not. If you want a scholarship for some branches from the high school program, like Air Force and Navy in particular, that increases your chances, but you need to study what you're going to do well at and want to stay in and are going to excel. So, yes. And especially if you walk onto the program, any major's fine.
Yeah. If you don't get a high school scholarship for ROTC, it means you have no opportunity.
Definitely not. Like we said, more people walk on and join right from the beginning or maybe second semester. So the earlier, the better. Programs will take people sophomore year, but then usually there's some catch up to do. And it just doesn't give you as much time to kind of try before you buy, like we talked about.
And I think these last two are really important. This one is ROTC guarantees your preferred job.
So there are no guarantees in life. But the military does ask you what you want and you know what you need to do to get that job. Like certain jobs have certain major requirements, physical requirements, health. But it's always the needs of the military. So you have to know, like, part of being selfless as an officer is doing, what the military needs, whether, you want to go to South Korea or not, or you want to be a transportation officer or not, you need to go where they need you.
Or you want to be an MP or not, and they just say, no, we want you to do this. Like, yeah. And lastly,
Exactly.
if you have to leave the ROTC, that always will create a service obligation.
So if you leave your freshman year, so before the first day of sophomore year, there's no obligation. If you have a scholarship, you're a sophomore, junior, senior, and you need to leave, they could enlist you to take that back. That's a military decision, not the unit's decision. But typically when people leave, it may be more for medical, so they're not asking you to pay that back. If you flunked out of school, did something, you absolutely weren't supposed to do, again, they could ask you to pay it back or serve in the military.
Yep.
I would say I've seen that like 2, 3 times, in 31 years. So it's pretty rare.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's not common at all, but I think there's a myth and there's a fear that, like, oh, if I
Right.
don't like it, I have to, somehow pay back. And I'm like, well, no, you
Right.
get to try before you buy, so to speak, and get into it
Right.
for a full year. So awesome.
Right. Perfect.
So I did want to give a little bit more detail as to how students and families can look at the scholarship process and be a
Mhm.
strong competitive applicant. So let's dive
Okay.
into that a little bit more. So what are some things that you would recommend for
Mhm.
student and a family to note, and for counselors who are listening as well? If they're looking at ROTC
Sure.
scholarships, what is the best way to be a competitive applicant for those really big ROTC scholarships?
Perfect. So one, being a strong student, right? Taking rigorous course load, a couple years of a foreign language, 4 years of math and science and English if your school doesn't require those, taking a full course load. If you can take honors, AP, dual enrollment, and you're that kind of student, definitely challenge yourself with that. So be college ready. Definitely think about the importance of standardized testing. So it doesn't matter if it's SAT or ACT, but really make sure you are prepping and testing junior year so that when you get to that summer before senior year, you have ideally scores you're happy with that will help you. also do the research on the schools and the ROTC units. So not just the ROTC pages you put up, but each unit is going to have their website. They
Yep.
often have Facebook, Instagram, maybe Twitter, etc. So it's super easy to follow units on Instagram and Facebook. I do that to see like what are the activities, what are they doing, what's new and exciting, and it gives you a lot of just good background information. But I always want students to go and reach out to the recruiting officer with those programs at those schools, and they could kind of tell you, this is our program, this is our climate, can we help with admissions? What are our students doing?
Right.
So making sure the unit's a good fit too, just like, is the school a good fit?
Yeah.
Um, I would also say challenge yourself as a leader. So there's very typical things kids going into the military will look at, like scouts and government, volunteering work, maybe some of the junior ROTC or other military programs. But honestly, being a leader where it matters to you. It could be in your
Mhm.
club soccer team, it could be in the drama department, it could be with band, it could be with a nonprofit. You could have a leadership role in your community or your family. So challenge yourself and be able to kind of quantify like how you've made a difference. One other thing I would think about is students don't often look at the medical requirements, and the military is really strict about things like asthma and learning difference accommodations, medication,
Yep.
mental health. And so it's not to say like I had asthma as a child, I can't come in. That's not necessarily the case. But they don't want high schoolers on accommodations with extended time for tests. They don't want them on ADHD medications. They don't want them to have major issues with anxiety and depression that are still being treated for multiple years. So those things will often medically disqualify you if you get the scholarship offer, because that's when they do the medical. But that's not to say you can't have experienced that, resolved it, prove you're doing well, walk onto ROTC, and then compete for a spot. So sometimes the clock has to run down. Like I've been off accommodations for 4 years and I'm doing well. So ROTC gives you that flexibility because you can walk on and then get
Mhm.
qualified. And the units work really hard with students to do that. So often they are able to get them qualified because once you have the medical, then you can compete for a scholarship or a commissioning spot. But a lot of people don't know about those medical issues. So, doing that research early and asking the units, like, is that going to be an issue?
Yep.
Because yes, it will be an issue. It's going to take some time to resolve.
Yep.
Mhm.
I also, this is all super, super helpful, and I hope people rewind and listen to all of that and note everything that you gave them, because that was a lot of good stuff. I also want to remind families that when you're visiting colleges, make sure that you are
Mhm.
also visiting the ROTC office. When I worked at Iowa State in the Office of Admissions, I had dual enroll. I was in the Academic Success Center and admissions, and in admissions I was one of the liaisons to the ROTC office. And if a student wanted to schedule a meeting with them, what typically would happen is they would do our normal admission day, and then afterwards, there was a slot
Perfect.
at the end that families could go meet with the ROTC office and kind of learn more
Right.
about that. And that was available for freshmen and for transfers. So there were
I love that.
opportunities
Mhm.
they could do that. And that's been true at several of the colleges that I've experienced, is
Mhm.
that it is a separate schedule. So if you're wanting to visit with ROTC, you plan your normal visit to admissions, and then you would have a separate meeting time with ROTC. But yeah, make sure you do that. As you said, you can follow them on the social media accounts, but if you're going to
Right.
the campus, go visit.
Right.
Like, go see what these people are like and see if you're going to be okay with that type of, vibe.
Right. Exactly. And just like we say, visit during the school year. So the ROTC
Right.
units are going to be there all year, but they're going to be less manned in the summer because people are doing these summer programs, with the students. But absolutely start with an informational interview. And I've had students, like I have a student who applied to Georgia Tech. He did his informational interview with them. And then when it was time for his Air Force scholarship interview, it was the same officer at Georgia
Yeah.
Tech. So now they've communicated a couple times. He's way less worried. He's had interview prep prep practice, like with me and with him and with other things too. And so the units are there to help. Like they're doing that work because they care about building young leaders. But definitely get that visit time and get that, that interview prep time too. So,
And the interview prep is really key. So parents, counselors help students figure out how to, give a good handshake, look people in the eye, like engage with adults without having to be prepped. I love when I interview students and I'll say, "So, what are you interested in?" And then they look at their parent like, "Okay, no. You need to have the answer. Like, mom and dad are not answering these questions for you. You have to be ready
right,
to answer those things." And
right,
you don't have to talk like a professional, speaker that has been doing this for years, but a student needs to be able to, quote unquote, stand on their own 2 feet and answer a
right.
question and look a person in an eye and say, "Yep,
Oh, yes.
this is who I am. This is what I'm thinking about." You don't have to
Right.
know your whole path perfectly, but you've got to be able to engage with the adults.
Right. And have done the research too, like
Yeah,
look at websites, listen to podcasts, read military books, because part of that interview is like, what do you want to do in the Navy? What community do you want to go
right.
into? Like, why is it a fit for you? So there's families that hire me just for that interview prep, but like, you can't apply to this and be like, it might be cool to be in the military. Like, you
Right.
definitely need to have done enough research to see why it's a good fit and
Yeah.
what you hope to do.
Well, and I think the biggest piece of advice, and this is the advice that you and I give to all of our students all of the time, is have plan A, plan B, plan C,
Hmm.
because things may not work out. I had a student
Right.
years ago that was found that when they were preparing for the physical assessment for ROTC, found out that he had a medical issue that he was not aware of. And so all of a sudden it was like, oh, and was now going to be disqualified because of this medical issue. He had a significant
Hmm.
heart issue, but that didn't come out until they started preparing for the physical fitness assessment.
Right.
And it was like, okay, well, now he had to come up with a different plan. So I'm not
And
saying that that's going to
maybe a
happen.
different school list.
Right. Yeah.
Right. For sure. For sure. Just like the academies, they're so competitive. That's your reach school. Like we have to have
Right.
target and likely options. For sure. Yeah. And the other thing too, like I had a case recently where I had a student at Auburn in Air Force ROTC, and Air Force ROTC does something a little different where if you don't get selected for the summer field training after sophomore year, you may not be able to continue in the program. It's like one program that does a little weeding out there. And so my student was heartbroken because they really wanted to be an Air Force pilot and they were doing a great job. But just in terms of, overall ranking, like nationally, everyone can't go. Some
Yes.
people have to, be declined. So, I talked to the student and the parent, and I was like, why don't you go talk to Army ROTC? And Army units have taken Air Force ROTC
Mhm.
cadets who are great, who don't get picked, bring them right in. So the student went over, super disappointed, really mad, went over to Army. They're now, in their going into their final year of Army ROTC,
Nice.
competing for a flying spot. They love it. They were able to get some financial funding. And I said to the dad recently, like, this is that example where sometimes doors close and we're
Yeah.
disappointed and we have to figure out why and what can we take from it. But it's actually a better fit for him. And the
Mhm.
student said, like, I really like it's gritty, it's physically challenging, it's kind of like boots on the ground, and it's even a better fit for him. So sometimes a door closes, we got to be reroute it and try something different and not give up. So I think, like anything, it all works out in the end. We may not see
Absolutely.
why at that moment, but it works out.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I'm really glad you shared that so that people can hear that that is another option. You may just have to switch.
Hmm.
Maybe Air Force wasn't the
Right,
right fit, and the Army's a better fit.
right,
And
right.
yeah, the hard part is helping students and families understand that your full life plan is not finished at age 17. Like, so prepare for an adventure, folks, because we got a long way to
Yes,
go.
right.
Well, Lisa, I really want to thank you for everything that you share with us today. And we've come to the point in the podcast where you get to share a little bit of a soapbox issue with us. So this is your
Mhm.
time to speak to my listeners and reach out to those watching on YouTube to
Okay.
what's the advice that you hope people take away from all of this? If you gave them your little soundbite, what's the thing that you wish everyone would know?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about college admissions, and it does relate to ROTC, like we were saying. But I feel like there's a lot of parents that are really focused on prestige, and that's hard for me because there's great outcomes everywhere you go, and a wonderful kid is going to do great regardless of where they go. And so I think it's frustrating when parents only want top 30 business schools or it's not in this US News ranking. So I implore people look beyond that and find the best fit for your child, academic, social, financial. The other thing is, I feel like, and as a parent with three grown kids, I feel like kids are so overcommitted and overscheduled, and there's not that balance. And I see a lot of kids that, they have 2, 3 hours of studying, but they're in sports for 3, 4 hours and they have volunteering and work and music and, all that. And I think if kids could kind of take a step back and say, what are the 2, 3 things that are most important and put their time into that, like not just athletics, not just music,
Mm-hmm.
but figure out what matters. Um, Along those lines, I see there's a lot of kids who don't have employment experience in high school.
Yes.
And I feel like that is such a valuable life skill, that initiative, that showing up, that working with people different than yourself that may be annoying, right? Working
Yep.
as a team and communicating. So I would love to see more kids carve out time for work. Obviously some kids have to do it for their family purposes, but even if you don't, could you work a little bit in the summer? Could you start a pet sitting, house sitting business? The other thing is, I don't see as much volunteering in some cases as I used to. For the military, like that employment is really important, that leadership, followership, but also military volunteering is really important. But I talk to kids and sometimes they're like, no, our family doesn't volunteer. And sometimes kids don't realize like that they are very privileged. And in a lot of
Mhm.
cases, they can find the time to give back. So I really encourage my kids, like, can you work and can you volunteer? Maybe not all at the same time, maybe not year round, but I think there's a lot that they can get from that empathy, giving back to others, but also meeting people, learning new things, not
Right.
just being home on social media, you know,
Mm-hmm.
playing video games. So, have like a realistic balanced list. Don't be caught up in prestige and really think about how you're spending your time. And are you doing things too that are going to help you stretch and grow? That's my 2 cents.
I the
Might be three.
With inflation, it might be $2, but hey, but that's all that was all wonderful, and I really appreciate you sharing all of that.
Thank you.
I absolutely love that you talked about getting a job. I have a whole podcast on that because, man, students, that's you want to boost up your resume and stand out in the crowd, like go get a job. Like, yeah, everything
Right.
that all of your soapbox advice was absolutely incredible, spot on. And I think I've got a podcast for each one of those things that you recommended because I was just like, come on,
Good.
students, you've got
Right.
there's more to this than just great academics and only doing sports. So like, come on,
Right.
we got to do about this. Well, Lisa, you have been absolutely incredible, so knowledgeable,
Thank you.
so thorough and detailed. I really appreciate all of the information and time that you've spent with me today. I can't thank you enough. This is going to be super helpful for families, counselors, and students who want to explore the possibility of going to ROTC.
I love that. Thank you for the chance to talk about it. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation. And I appreciate you just getting that information out there because it could change some students' lives, like we talked about.
That's the goal.
Great.
Well, folks, thanks for listening to Don't Chuck It Up. If today's episode was helpful, be sure to subscribe and share it with a family navigating the college search. I'll be back next week with more guidance to help you make confident college decisions. Until then, remember, don't chuck it up.